An explosive dinner in a historic Boston townhouse. My daughter Eleanor's fiancé, Kevin, introduced me as just some retiree. But when his father, a former cop, looked at me, he turned pale and told his son, "Do you want to go to prison?" Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The Boston Globe rustled in my hands, its headlines about city politics blurring in the warm lamplight of my study. Outside the window, the streets of Newton were quiet, marked only by the whisper of autumn leaves skittering in a light breeze. This had become the rhythm of my life since retirement. Orderly, predictable, and peaceful. That peace shattered when the doorbell rang. Eleanor stood on the threshold, unannounced. She was wearing her navy business suit, the one she reserved for her most important client meetings. A sense of unease crept over me. This was no casual visit. "Dad," she said, stepping inside and bringing the crisp September evening air with her. I folded the newspaper, placing it with deliberate precision on the small table beside my leather armchair. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She stood by the fireplace, her fingers twisting something that caught the lamplight. A diamond ring I had never seen before. My heart skipped a beat. "I'm getting married," she said, her voice soft but firm. The newspaper I had just so carefully folded slipped from my lap, landing with a soft thud on the hardwood floor. I managed to keep my voice steady, a skill honed over 30 years in the courtroom. "To whom? I don't even know this man." She shifted her weight, the ring spinning around her finger like a nervous habit already formed. "His name is Kevin Vance. And yes, you're right, you don't know him yet." As if that made the situation better rather than infinitely worse, I asked, though a part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "How long have you two been together?" 2 weeks. The words tumbled out defensively. "But Dad, it's real love. I know how that sounds, but 2 weeks." I stood up, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. "Eleanor, people don't get engaged after 2 weeks. They barely know each other's middle names after 2 weeks." She took a step back, her hand gripping the mantelpiece, where photos of our family stared down at us. Moments that had taken decades to build, now apparently outweighed by 14 days with a stranger. "You always do this," she said, her voice rising. "You analyze everything like it's a court case. Not everything needs to be cross-examined, Dad. When my daughter announces she's marrying someone I've never met, yes, it does." The ring flashed again as she gestured emphatically. Round cut, maybe 2 carats, set in white gold. Expensive. Too expensive for someone she'd known for 2 weeks. "Kevin makes me happy," she continued. "Happier than I've been in years. Isn't that enough? Happy is good. Marriage is permanent." I tried to stay calm, but a prosecutor's brain never rests. It was gathering evidence, building a case. After a tense silence, Eleanor's shoulders sagged slightly. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came to share good news, and to ask if you'd like to meet him. Of course I want to meet him. And question him," I added silently. "We could have dinner somewhere nice. Maybe Monday, at the Commonwealth Club." An expensive choice. Either she was trying to impress me, or he was the type who expected expensive restaurants. "I'll make the reservation," I said. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her posture. "You'll like him, Dad. He's confident, successful, and ambitious. Confident, successful, ambitious, and engaged to my daughter after 2 weeks. In my experience, men who moved that fast were usually running from something, or towards something that couldn't wait." "I'm sure I will," I lied smoothly. Eleanor smiled, a relieved, hopeful smile, and walked to the front door. As she was leaving, I asked one last question. "What have you told him about me?" She paused, her hand on the brass doorknob. "Just that you're my dad, that you're retired, enjoying the quiet life. I didn't mention what you used to do. Figured that could come up naturally. Smart girl." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a very expensive dinner reservation to make. Monday would give me the weekend to think, to prepare my questions. The Commonwealth Club buzzed with Monday evening energy. The soft clink of expensive glassware and the low hum of important conversations. I arrived 15 minutes early, an old habit from my courthouse days. and claimed a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Always control your environment when you can. At 7:10, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Her arm was linked through that of a tall man in a charcoal suit, a man whose confident strides surveyed the restaurant as if he were considering buying it. Brian Harper, or rather, Kevin Vance. The moment I saw his face, a nagging sense of familiarity pricked at the back of my mind. "Sorry we're late," Eleanor said as they approached, her voice a little breathless. "Traffic was murder." "No problem at all," I said, standing to extend my hand to Kevin. "A pleasure to meet you." His handshake was firm, almost aggressive. "Mr. Morgan, the pleasure is all mine. Eleanor has told me so much about you." His smile was polished, the kind I'd seen on defendants trying to charm their way out of a conviction. "She says you're enjoying retirement. Must be nice to have all that time on your hands." We settled into our seats, Kevin pulling out Eleanor's chair with a theatrical flourish that felt rehearsed. "What line of work are you in, Kevin?" I asked, as the waiter handed us our menus. "Various projects," he said, not looking up from the wine list. "IT consulting mainly. Corporate solutions, business optimization, that sort of thing." It was a deliberately vague answer. In my experience, people who couldn't describe their jobs clearly often had something to hide. "And you, Mr. Morgan?" Kevin looked up, his features arranged in a mask of polite interest. "What did you do before all that free time?" "I was a prosecutor," I said simply. "State's Attorney's Office." The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. A brief tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible stiffening of his shoulders. Most people had one of two reactions to my former profession: respect or nervousness. Kevin's was squarely in the nervous category. "A prosecutor," he repeated, his smile now looking painted on. That must have been intense. The waiter's arrival saved him from having to say more. Kevin ordered the $40 Wagyu steak and a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly groceries. I chose the salmon, noting the slight lift of his eyebrows at my modest selection. "I suppose fish is lighter," he remarked, gesturing at my menu choice. "Better for the digestion at your age." The comment was a small slap, but I let it pass. The insults, however, continued to build. He dismissed my 3 decades of public service as taking a break and described his own generation as the ones who innovate while mine was always living in the past. Eleanor shot him warning looks, but he was emboldened by my silence, mistaking restraint for weakness. The final blow came with the main course. "Now this," he announced, cutting into his steak with theatrical precision, "is how a steak should look." He glanced at my salmon with barely concealed disdain. Of course, that probably matters less when your most strenuous activity for the day is reading the newspaper. He then turned to Eleanor, gesturing toward me with his fork. "You know, I think it's great that your dad has found his groove in retirement," he said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "It's important to accept life's natural progression, to be comfortable just existing. All that empty space to fill. Empty space." The words hung in the air. My entire life, my career, my reputation, raising my daughter, reduced to simply killing time. I felt the familiar calm of the courtroom settle over me, the ability to absorb an attack without flinching. I methodically placed my fork and knife down on my plate. The clink of silver against porcelain was the only sound at our table. Then, I folded my napkin with the same precision I used to organize case files and placed it on the table. I looked directly at my daughter, my voice quiet but carrying an authority that made Kevin's smug expression falter. "Eleanor," I said, "would you mind stepping outside with me for a moment?" The cool September air hit us like a physical relief after the suffocating tension inside. The parking lot was dimly lit, shadows stretching between expensive corners. In the distance, the city of Boston hummed along, oblivious to the private war that had just been declared at our table. We stopped between a BMW and a Mercedes, far enough from the restaurant's entrance to speak freely. Eleanor turned on me, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "What was that? What just happened to me?" "That," I said, my own voice dangerously level, "was your fiancé showing his true colors." "His true colors?" She wheeled to face me, her heels clicking on the asphalt. "You mean being nervous about meeting my father for the first time? You mean trying to make conversation and maybe having a little too much wine?" "Eleanor," That man just spent 20 minutes insulting me to my face. He was trying to be friendly, she shot back. You're the one who sat there like a judge, analyzing every single word he said. The comparison stung because it was partially true. 30 years of reading people, of sorting truth from lies, of protecting the innocent from predators that instinct doesn't just switch off because you've traded a prosecutor's badge for a retirement watch. I don't like him, I said simply. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. You don't like him? You've decided you don't like the man I'm going to marry after one dinner? After watching him disrespect you and lie about his intentions? Lie about what? What lies, Dad? IT consulting, various projects. Eleanor, the man can't give a straight answer about what he does for a living. Because you were interrogating him. The words hit harder than any of Kevin's insults. I felt something crack inside my chest. Is that what you think I did for a living? Interrogate people? Tears were welling in her eyes now, but her voice remained fiery. Isn't that exactly what you're doing right now? Putting my fiancé on trial because he doesn't measure up to your impossible standards. My standards include basic respect and honesty. Your standards include control. The tears were flowing freely now, but her anger blazed brighter than ever. You can't stand that I'm independent. You can't stand that I made a choice without consulting your office first. This isn't about independence, Eleanor. Then what is it about? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you can't handle the fact that your little girl grew up and doesn't need Daddy's permission anymore. The parking lot fell silent, the sound of our breathing lost in the distant city traffic. A light rain had begun to fall, misting the streetlights and creating halos around the passing cars. I love him, Dad, she finally said, her voice cracking on the words. And instead of being happy for me, you're trying to tear it all apart. She fumbled in her purse for her car keys, her hands shaking. I'm 32 years old. I don't need you to protect me from my own decisions. I watched my daughter, this fierce, brilliant woman I'd raised, preparing to walk away from me for a man who saw her father as a joke. Eleanor, please, just listen. I'm done listening. She found her keys, clicking the remote until her sedan's lights flashed in response. I'm done with your suspicions and your interrogations. She opened her car door, then turned back to face me one last time, the rain plastering a strand of hair to her cheek. You know what, Dad? For someone who spent his whole career fighting for justice, you sure don't trust people to make their own choices. The car door slammed with a finality that echoed off the surrounding buildings. I stood in the growing rain, watching her taillights disappear into the Boston night, leaving me alone with the weight of everything I'd failed to say. In the days that followed, the silence in my house became a physical presence. My orderly, predictable life had been replaced by a gnawing emptiness. The family photos lining the hallway seemed to mock me Eleanor at 5, gap-toothed and trusting. Eleanor at 16, rolling her eyes but still letting me drive her to prom. When had I become the enemy in her story? My first calls went straight to her bright, professional voicemail. You've reached Eleanor Morgan. Please leave a message. I hung up the first few times without speaking, the sound of her recorded voice a painful reminder of what I had lost. Eventually, I forced myself to leave a message. Eleanor, it's Dad. Please call me back. The words sounded hollow, inadequate. A man who had built a 30-year career on courtroom eloquence was reduced to a stammered plea on an answering machine. By the end of the first week, my messages documented a steady decay from controlled concern to barely contained desperation. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I handled that badly. Eleanor, please. I'm not trying to control your life. I'm just trying to understand it. The unanswered calls felt like small deaths. In the second week, my despair drove me to do something I knew was a mistake. I started driving to Beacon Hill, parking my sedan down the street from Kevin's modern townhouse. I would just sit there for an hour, engine running for warmth against the October chill, hoping for a glimpse of her leaving for work. It was a pathetic ritual, the act of a man with too much empty space and no idea how to fill it. The lowest point came on a Saturday afternoon. I was at Whole Foods, doing something as mundane as selecting apples, when I saw her in the organic produce section. For a single, beautiful moment, I forgot we were fighting. A wave of pure, fatherly love washed over me. Eleanor, I called out, a smile breaking across my face. She looked up, and for a split second, her face brightened with automatic recognition. Then, reality crashed back down. The smile vanished, her shoulders tensed, and a look of something close to fear replaced the warmth in her eyes. Without a word, she abandoned her shopping cart right there between the kale and the spinach, and walked quickly, almost ran toward the exit. I followed, my own bag of apples forgotten in my hand. "Eleanor, wait!" My voice was lost in the bustle of the crowded store. By the time I reached the parking lot, her sedan was already pulling onto the street, leaving me standing next to a line of shopping carts. A young security guard approached me then, his expression polite but firm. "Everything okay, sir?" I looked down at the single bag of apples in my hand, the symbol of my failed mission. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "I just missed my daughter." The truth of that statement, in more ways than one, was a crushing weight. I had officially hit rock bottom, reduced from a respected father to a man who made his own child flee in a grocery store. That evening I sat in my study, the untouched bag of apples from Whole Foods sitting on the kitchen counter like a monument to my failure. The frantic energy of the past weeks had finally evaporated, leaving behind the cold, heavy certainty that my approach was not only failing, but was actively driving my daughter further away. I had become the villain in her story, and I didn't know how to rewrite the part. For the first time in my life, I admitted I needed counsel. I picked up the phone and dialed the only number that came to mind. Henry Miller and I had been friends for 40 years, since we were young, ambitious lawyers trying to make a name for ourselves. He had gone on to become the Honorable Judge Miller, one of the most respected jurists in the state. He was the only person I knew whose mind was as sharp and skeptical as my own, but tempered with a judge's wisdom where mine was sharpened by a prosecutor's cynicism. He answered on the second round. "Arthur, to what do I owe the honor?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him everything. The 2-week engagement, the disastrous dinner at the Commonwealth Club, Kevin's veiled insults, the brutal argument in the parking lot. My voice was flat as I recounted the unanswered calls and the pathetic vigil in my car. I finished with the humiliating scene at the grocery store, the image of my own daughter fleeing from me. Henry listened without interruption, a skill he'd perfected on the bench. When I was finished, the silence on the line stretched for a long moment. I could picture him in his own study, probably swirling a glass of brandy, considering my testimony. "Well," he finally said, his voice calm and measured, "it sounds to me like you've made a classic rookie mistake. A mistake. You're treating your daughter like a hostile witness on the stand, Arthur," he explained. "You're cross-examining her life instead of living in it with her. You've presented your evidence, made your closing argument, and now you're badgering her because she won't accept your verdict." His words hit me with the force of a physical blow because they were true. I had approached the most important relationship in my life with the same tactics I'd used to put criminals behind bars. "So what do I do, Henry?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I've lost her." "First," he said, "you stop. Stop the calls, stop the driving by her house, stop all of it. Give the girl some space to breathe. She's a smart woman. You raised her to be. Let her make her own mistakes. That's her right, and your burden as a father is to be there to help her clean up the mess if she does." I felt a fresh wave of despair. "So I just do nothing?" "I didn't say that," Henry's voice sharpened slightly. "I said to stop the pursuit, but you never, ever ignore your instincts. You were the best prosecutor in Illinois for a reason, Arthur. If your gut tells you something is wrong with this man, it probably is. The truth has a way of revealing itself if you give it enough room to breathe." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Be a father, but think like a prosecutor. Be patient. Wait for your opening." After we hung up, I didn't feel happy, but I felt a sense of clarity for the first time in weeks. The frantic desperation was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. Henry was right. My strategy of direct assault had failed. It was time for a new one, a strategy I knew better than anyone. Patience. I kept my word. To Henry and to myself. The frantic calls stopped. The desperate drives to Beacon Hill ended. I gave my daughter the space she had demanded, a silence that stretched through the end of September and deep into October. The leaves outside my window turned from green to brilliant shades of gold and crimson, then began to fall, littering the lawn like forgotten memories. My days settled into a quiet routine of reading, long walks, and waiting. It was a cold, disciplined patience, the same kind I'd once used to wait for a suspect to make a mistake. The wedding, I knew, must be getting close. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after my conversation with Henry, the phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name I had begun to think I would never see again. Eleanor. My heart hammered against my ribs in a way that was probably not healthy for a 65-year-old man. I answered before the second ring, trying to keep my voice even. Hello? Dad? Her voice was small, hesitant, a ghost of its usual confident tone. It's me. It's Eleanor. Eleanor, I said, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washing over me. I'm glad you called. There was a pause, filled with the unspoken weight of the past month. The wedding is this Saturday, she said in a rush, as if trying to get the words out before she lost her nerve. The news was a quiet blow. I hadn't even known the date. I know this is short notice, she continued, but Kevin's parents, they're very traditional, and they're insisting on meeting you. They want to have a family dinner before the ceremony. The request hung in the air. This wasn't a peace offering from Eleanor, but an obligation forced upon her. Still, it was an opening. It was a chance. Of course, I said immediately, my voice firm and clear. I would be honored to meet them. Really? She sounded surprised, as if she'd been steeling herself for an argument. Because they have strong opinions about family. I understand, I said, already reaching for a pen and a notepad. The old habits kicking in. When and where? Tomorrow night. Friday. At Kevin's house. Our house. 7 o'clock. She paused, and I could hear the faint noise of an office in the background. She was calling from work, using a sliver of her day to rebuild the bridge we had burned. Dad, she started again, her voice dropping, becoming more vulnerable than I had heard it in years. I need to ask you something. Anything, sweetheart. Can you just be yourself? Not the prosecutor version of yourself, she clarified, her words laced with a pleading tone. Just my dad. The request was a clean shot, straight to the heart. She was asking me to silence the very instincts that were screaming that something was wrong. She was asking me to trust her, even when I didn't trust her choice. In that moment, I knew my answer would determine everything. I'll be on my best behavior, I promised. And the relief that flooded her voice was audible, a soft exhale across the line. Thank you, she whispered. And Dad, I'm sorry about everything. You don't need to apologize, I said, meaning it completely. I handled it all wrong. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my study, the details of the dinner written on the notepad in front of me. Friday night, a chance for a truce, a chance to be a father again. It felt less like a dinner invitation and more like a summons to the most important trial of my life. The moment the call ended, I was in motion. The fragile hope Eleanor had offered was a powerful motivator, and I began to prepare for Friday's dinner with the same methodical precision I had once reserved for the most important cases of my career. This was no different. The verdict would determine whether I remained a part of my daughter's life. My closet revealed the wardrobe of a man who'd spent decades in courtrooms. Conservative suits, understated ties, shoes polished to a mirror shine. But this wasn't a trial, I reminded myself. I needed to project respectability without intimidation, authority without arrogance. I selected my charcoal suit, the one Eleanor had complimented at my college graduation. A navy tie with subtle silver threads, trustworthy but not flashy. Black Oxfords, recently resoled. The image of a retired professional who understood propriety. Thursday afternoon took me to a florist in Newton, a small shop run by a woman who had been arranging flowers for 30 years. I explained the situation, feeling foolishly out of my element. First meeting with the future in-laws, I said. My daughter mentioned her fiancé's mother, Carol, loves orchids. The woman studied me over her reading glasses. White orchids, she declared with certainty. Classic, respectful, not too expensive, not too cheap. Perfect. Next was the wine shop. I needed a gift for Frank Vance, the former police officer. I chose a mid-range California Cabernet, a bottle good enough to show respect, but not so extravagant as to seem like a bribe. Every detail was a strategic choice. Friday was a day of final preparations. I showered with unusual care and shaved twice. The face staring back at me from the mirror looked like a man preparing for the performance of his life, which in many ways he was. I practiced my introductions while nodding my tie. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for welcoming me into your son's home. Firm handshake, direct eye contact, a genuine smile. At 6:15, I stood before the hallway mirror, making one last adjustment to my tie. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, marking the minutes until a dinner that could restore my relationship with Eleanor or destroy it permanently. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her. "Thank you for doing this, Dad. It means everything." I typed back quickly. "See you soon, sweetheart." Her words were the final piece of armor I needed. I picked up the pristine white orchids from the dining table, collected the bottle of wine from the kitchen counter, and walked out to my car. The October evening was crisp and clear, the Boston skyline glittering in the distance. It was time to drive into enemy territory, or, with any luck, to meet my daughter's new family. The townhouse stood like a monument to new money, 3 stories of glass and steel rising above the historic, tree-lined streets of Beacon Hill. I parked my modest sedan carefully between a gleaming BMW and a silent Tesla, checking my reflection one last time in the rearview mirror before gathering the gifts. This was enemy territory, and I was walking in unarmed. Kevin opened the door before I could ring the bell, his smile as sharp as a cross-examination. "Well, well," he said, "the distinguished retiree has arrived." "Good evening, Kevin," I said, extending the flowers. "These are for your mother." He took the orchids and examined them with theatrical interest. How thoughtful. Very traditional. Mom loves flowers, though she's more into exotic varieties these days. Still, a nice gesture. The backhanded acceptance wasn't lost on me. "And a bottle of wine for your father," I said, handing him the Cabernet. "Ah, Californian," he noted, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "Dad's more of a bourbon man, but I'm sure he'll adapt. Come in, come in." The interior screamed expense without warmth. Minimalist furniture that cost more than my first house. Abstract art that looked like a financial statement. This wasn't a home. It was a showroom. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, looking elegant in a black dress, though I could see the stress around her eyes. She kissed my cheek, her relief at my presence palpable. As Kevin launched into a tour of his expensive sound system and imported kitchen fixtures, Eleanor tried to intervene. "Kevin, maybe Dad would like to sit down." Of course," he said, gesturing toward a vast leather section. "Make yourself comfortable, Mr. Morgan, though I suppose comfort is relative when you're used to simpler accommodations." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang with a sharp, insistent chime. "That'll be Mom and Dad," Kevin announced, his chest puffing with anticipation. Time to meet the family. A moment later, they entered. Carol Vance was exactly as I'd pictured, radiating the kind of warmth that made church volunteers successful, her smile genuine and immediate. She embraced Eleanor affectionately. Behind her was Frank Vance. He was a compact, alert man, with the observant eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime reading people and situations. His handshake was firm, his words few. As he stepped into the living room, his gaze swept the area in a familiar pattern, the old law enforcement habit of cataloging exits, occupants, and potential threats. It was a professional assessment I recognized instantly. His gaze passed over Eleanor, Kevin, and the expensive furniture, and then it landed on me, standing quietly by the sectional with a glass of scotch in my hand. His entire demeanor shifted. It wasn't just a flicker of recognition. It was a seismic shock. The color drained from his face as if a plug had been pulled. His shoulders went rigid. His friendly, paternal expression was replaced by one of disbelief, and something else I knew all too well. Fear. He knew me. At that exact moment, Kevin, blissfully unaware of the silent thunderclap that had just occurred, gestured grandly toward me. He beamed at his parents, ready to deliver the punchline he'd likely been rehearsing all evening. "Come meet the family," he announced with a triumphant flourish. "Mom, Dad, meet the empty space." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Empty space. Eleanor gasped. her hand flying to her mouth. Carol Vance's warm smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. I remained perfectly still, my expression unreadable, my gaze fixed on Frank Vance. He was the only one who truly understood the magnitude of what had just happened. Before Kevin could even savor his moment of perceived triumph, his father moved with a speed that belied his age. Frank's hand shot out and clamped down on his son's arm with the urgency of someone preventing a disaster. The grip was pure steel. "Kitchen," Frank hissed, his voice low and sharp with a command that tolerated no argument. "Now, Dad, what are you?" Kevin started to protest, but his father's grip tightened, and he was physically pulled from the living room. They disappeared into the adjoining kitchen, but the townhouse's open-plan design made privacy impossible. Their urgent, panicked whispers carried clearly to where the three of us stood frozen in an awkward tableau. "Are you insane?" Frank's voice was a harsh slash of sound. "Do you have any idea who that man is? What are you talking about?" Kevin sounded bewildered, annoyed. "He's just some retiree, Eleanor's dad. Lives on a pension, plays golf, reads the newspaper." There was a choked sound from Frank, a mix of disbelief and fury. "That's former Massachusetts State Prosecutor Arthur Morgan, the Iron Man from the AG's office. He spent 30 years putting half the criminals in this state behind bars." The silence that followed from the kitchen was absolute. In the living room, Carol was making a valiant attempt at normalcy, her hostess training overriding the obvious crisis. "Eleanor, dear, your dress is lovely. And Mr. Morgan, it's so wonderful to finally meet you." "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Vance," I replied calmly, my attention still fixed on the kitchen doorway. Eleanor wasn't listening. She was staring toward the kitchen, her brow furrowed in confusion. Kevin's voice finally returned, but it was a shadow of its former self, small, thin, and laced with dawning terror. But, he said he was retired." "He is retired," Frank shot back. "But Arthur Morgan doesn't stop being Arthur Morgan just because he handed in his badge. That man has connections in every law enforcement agency from here to D.C. He could destroy you with a single phone call." "Destroy me? Why would he?" I could almost hear Frank's teeth grinding. "Because you just introduced the most respected and feared prosecutor in the history of this Commonwealth as empty space." The final words were delivered with utter contempt. "You absolute fool." The whispering stopped. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the ridiculously expensive refrigerator. Then, we heard footsteps approaching. The reckoning was at hand. The footsteps stopped. Kevin appeared in the kitchen doorway first, his face as pale as courthouse marble. The arrogant, confident man who had dominated the evening was gone, replaced by a ghost, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost pitiful to behold. His father, Frank, followed a half-step behind, his expression grim and resolute, like a man preparing to face a sentencing. For a moment no one moved. Then Frank took control. He stepped forward, his posture formal, and addressed me with the measured respect of one law enforcement professional to another. "Prosecutor Morgan," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I believe we may have met before, professionally. I must apologize for my son's monumental ignorance. There is no excuse for it." All eyes turned to Kevin. He flinched under the weight of their gazes, unable to look at me. He stared at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. "Sir," he finally stammered, his voice cracking. "Mr. Morgan, I had no idea. I was completely out of line. I was disrespectful and rude, and I am so sorry." The transformation was absolute. The man who had called me irrelevant now stood before me, humbled and broken, finally understanding the chasm of power he had so foolishly tried to cross. Eleanor stared, her face a canvas of warring emotions. She looked from the shell of the man she loved, the quiet, retired father she thought she knew. A profound, world-altering understanding was dawning in her eyes. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You never told me." I turned to her then, my own voice gentle, a father's voice. "I never saw the need to discuss old cases at home, sweetheart. Work was work. You were my daughter. Those were two separate words." I gave Frank a small nod of acknowledgement. "We may have, Officer Vance." Then I looked at Kevin. He still couldn't meet my eyes. I could have let him hang there in his misery. I could have savored the victory, but looking at my daughter's stricken face, I knew what I had to do. This was her future, and my choice now would define it. Apology accepted, Kevin, I said. The relief that washed over his face was immediate. I continued, speaking to the entire room. But tonight, I'm not a prosecutor. I'm here as Eleanor's father. Tomorrow is her wedding day. I let that sink in. I suggest we move past this, for her. The crushing tension in the room finally broke. It was Carol Vance who seized the moment, stepping forward with a grateful, trembling smile. Then, Mr. Morgan, she said, her voice warm and sincere, would you do us the honor of finally joining us for dinner? I looked at Eleanor, who was watching me with tears in her eyes and a dawning pride I hadn't seen in years. I would be delighted, Mrs. Vance, I replied. The trial was over. We moved to the dining room, and the shift in the atmosphere was profound. The same minimalist, expensive room that had felt so cold and alienating just an hour before now seemed simply a place to eat dinner. The tension had vanished, replaced by a fragile, cautious curiosity. We took our seats, and for a moment, an awkward silence fell. It was Kevin who broke it, his voice quiet and stripped of all its earlier bravado. Mr. Morgan, he began, looking at me directly for the first time with something other than arrogance. If you don't mind me asking, what was it like? I mean, really like? Standing in a courtroom, staring down men you knew were monsters? The question was genuine. He wasn't trying to score points, he was trying to understand. I took a sip of water, considering my answer. It was heavy, I said honestly. You carry the weight of the victims, their families. You carry the weight of the law. Your only job is to make sure the truth is heavier than everything else. Frank Vance nodded from across the table. I remember the Castellano family takedown in '98, he said, his voice filled with professional respect. I was a patrol sergeant back then. We all thought you were insane to go after them. The entire organization was terrified of them. They were just bullies with too much power, I replied. Someone had to show them they weren't above the law. And just like that, a conversation began. For the next hour, Frank and I traded stories, his from the streets of Boston, mine from its courtrooms. We were two old soldiers from different sides of the same long war, finding common ground in shared battles and a mutual respect for the thin line that separates order from chaos. Through it all, Eleanor watched, her expression a mix of amazement and dawning pride. She was seeing a part of me that I had kept hidden from her, the formidable man who had spent 3 decades fighting for justice, not just the quiet newspaper-reading father she knew. She looked at me with new eyes, and I could see her finally understanding the protective instinct that had driven me from the very beginning. Kevin listened intently to every word, his earlier arrogance replaced by a humbling attentiveness. He asked smart questions. He didn't try to impress anyone. He was simply learning. Carol, bless her heart, steered the conversation toward lighter topics when it grew too dark, asking about how Eleanor's mother and I had met, creating a bridge between past and present. As the main course plates were cleared, a comfortable ease had settled over the table. The expensive steak and fine wine, once weapons of condescension in Kevin's hands, were now just components of a genuinely pleasant meal. I caught Eleanor's eye across the table, and she gave me a small, brilliant smile, a look of pure, uncomplicated love. The rift between us was healing. Dessert was served, and as Carol passed around plates of cheesecake, I saw Kevin look at me, a new resolve hardening his features. He had made a decision. As we finished our dessert, a comfortable silence settled over the table, the kind that speaks not of awkwardness but of contentment. It was in that quiet moment that Kevin cleared his throat and pushed his chair back slightly. He stood up, his wine glass in hand. Instantly, all conversation stopped. All eyes turned to him. He looked nervous, a stark contrast to the overbearing confidence he had displayed just a few hours earlier. He looked at his parents, then at Eleanor, and finally his gaze met mine. It was direct, and filled with a sincerity I had not thought him capable of. I'm not usually one for speeches, he began, his voice steady but humble. But I can't let this evening end without saying something important. I'd like to propose a toast. He paused, gathering his thoughts. This toast is for Mr. Morgan. He looked at me across the table. Tonight, I I was taught a very important and very humbling lesson. I came into this dinner thinking I knew what success and power looked like. I measured a man's worth by the car he drove or the house he lived in. I was arrogant, I was foolish, and I was wrong. Eleanor watched him, tears welling in her eyes, a look of profound love and pride on her face. His parents, Frank and Carol, watched their son with expressions of solemn approval. Mr. Morgan taught me tonight that true worth isn't in what you own, Kevin continued, his voice gaining strength. It's in your character, it's in your integrity. He taught me that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And more than anything, it's about having the wisdom to understand and admit when you have been profoundly and completely wrong. He raised his glass higher, his hand no longer trembling. So, this is to new beginnings, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. To family, and to the incredible honor of being welcomed into the family of a man who has spent his life quietly making the world a safer place for all of us. To Arthur Morgan. A respectful silence followed his words. Then, Frank raised his glass. To Arthur, he said with a proud nod. To Arthur, Carol and Eleanor echoed softly. I picked up my own glass and gave a slight nod to the young man who stood before me. No longer an antagonist, but a potential son. We all drank, and in that moment, the last of the evening's tension dissolved completely, replaced by a shared sense of hope and genuine respect. Kevin had, in a single, honest speech, atoned for his arrogance and proven he might just be worthy of my daughter after all. An hour later, the evening began to wind down. We shared coffee and quiet conversation, the earlier tension now a distant memory. Frank and I had found a dozen points of common history in Boston's long story of crime and justice, and Carol was already planning a brunch with Eleanor. When I finally stood to leave, the goodbyes were warm and genuine. Frank shook my hand firmly, a look of sincere respect in his eyes. It was an honor, prosecutor, he said quietly. Please, I replied, call me Arthur. Eleanor walked me to the door, stepping out with me into the crisp night air. We stood for a moment in silence on the top step of the modern townhouse, the lights of the city twinkling below us. The chill in the air was the same as it had been on the night of our fight, but this time there was no hostility between us, only a shared, quiet warmth. Dad, she began, her voice soft, her eyes shining in the dim light from the doorway. I am so sorry. I looked at her, at this incredible woman my daughter had become, and waited. I'm sorry for everything I said in that parking lot, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush of emotion. For not trusting your judgment, for being so blind, for not realizing the man you really are. I put my hand on her shoulder, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. This was the moment that mattered more than any verdict, any conviction, any headline. You knew exactly who I was, Eleanor, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You've always known. She looked up at me, confused. I was your father, I clarified. That's the only identity that ever really mattered. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but she was smiling. I'm so proud of you, Dad, she whispered. She hugged me then, a tight, desperate embrace that told me everything I needed to know. It was the hug of a little girl who had been lost and had finally found her way home. All the pain and silence of the past month melted away. In that moment, standing on a stranger's doorstep in Beacon Hill, it felt like my daughter was finally back. I held her for a long moment before letting go. I'll see you at the wedding, sweetheart. I love you, Dad. I love you too, I said. I walked to my car, and as I pulled away from the curb, I saw her still standing in the doorway, waving. I waved back, a lump forming in my throat, as I drove away from the glittering lights of the city and toward the quiet comfort of my own home. I wasn't a prosecutor, a legend, or an old man filling empty space. I was just a father, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. The drive home from Beacon Hill to Newton was quiet, the city lights of Boston streaking past my windows in a glow of red and gold. My hands rested easily on the steering wheel, a stark contrast to the white-knuckled grip I'd had on it for the past month. The car, which had become a lonely vessel for my stakeouts and desperate drives, now felt like a peaceful sanctuary. For 30 years, my world had been defined by a very specific kind of justice. It was a justice of evidence and statutes, of cross-examinations and closing arguments. It was a rigid, logical system designed to separate truth from lies, guilt from innocence. I had built my life on its foundations, and I had been good at it because its rules were clear. You gathered the facts, you presented your case, and a verdict was rendered. But the events of the last month had taught me about a different kind of justice, one that had no place in the courtroom. It was the messy, illogical, and deeply complicated justice of a family. In my quest to prove I was right about Kevin, I had almost lost the person who mattered most to me. I had treated my own home like a courtroom, and my daughter like a witness. I had won my case. Kevin's arrogance had been exposed. His character laid bare for all to see, but that victory had nearly cost me my daughter. I saw clearly now that in the calculus of family, winning the argument is often the surest way to lose. The real victory wasn't in being right. It was in the quiet grace of forgiveness. I thought about Kevin. The prosecutor in me, the one who had put men away for less, still harbored a sliver of skepticism. But the father in me, the one who had just seen his daughter's tearful, proud smile, had seen something else. A young man humbled by his own foolishness, a flash of genuine remorse, and the potential for change. People could be better than their worst mistakes. My daughter believed it, and tonight I had made the choice to believe it too. Pulling into my driveway, I looked at my house. It was the same brick colonial it had been yesterday, but it no longer felt empty. The silence that had haunted me for weeks was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of anticipation. The loneliness had lifted. I walked inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around me like a hug. On the mantelpiece, a photo of a 5-year-old Eleanor, gap-toothed and grinning, stared back at me. I had spent a lifetime trying to protect that smile. I realized tonight that sometimes the best way to protect someone is to trust them. The wedding was tomorrow, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I was truly, deeply looking forward to it. The wedding was held on a crisp Saturday afternoon in a sunlit room at an old Bostonian hotel, the windows overlooking a garden where the last of the autumn leaves clung stubbornly to the branches. It was a small, elegant ceremony, filled with close family and the quiet joy that comes from seeing two people genuinely happy. I stood in the back, content to be an observer. I watched Eleanor, my Eleanor, walk down the aisle, radiant in a simple white dress, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her. She had never looked more beautiful or more certain. I watched Kevin, who stood tall and straight, his gaze never leaving her face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of sincere, unadulterated adoration. During the reception, as music played softly in the background, Kevin made his way over to me. He held 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to me. "Arthur," he said, the name now comfortable and respectful on his tongue. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." "There's nothing to thank me for," I replied. "Yes, there is," he insisted, his eyes meeting mine. "You taught me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of her." I looked over at my daughter, who was laughing with Carol and her mother-in-law. She was so full of life. "Just make her happy, son," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's all that matters." "I will, sir," he said. "I promise." We clinked glasses, a quiet understanding passing between us. The prosecutor in me was finally completely silent. There was only a father, content in the knowledge that his daughter was loved. Later I watched Eleanor and Kevin take to the dance floor, moving together as one, their faces lit with the easy grace of true partnership. My work was done. Arthur's story is a powerful reminder that the most challenging trials we face often aren't in a courtroom, but within the walls of our own homes and the chambers of our own hearts. It speaks to a truth that every parent knows, the desperate urge to protect our children, and the painful necessity of letting them go. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is to release our need to be right, and to instead choose the path of understanding. True strength isn't found in winning an argument, but in having the grace to forgive and the patience to allow the truth to unfold in its own time. It's a lesson in humility, reminding us that respect is earned not through authority, but through character. We've all felt the fear of seeing someone we love make a choice we don't understand, But as Arthur learned, it is in those very moments that trust and patience become the most important gifts we can give. His journey from suspicion to peace shows us that a family's foundation isn't built on agreement, but on an unconditional love that is strong enough to weather any storm. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Arthur's final choice? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories like this one. Thank you for watching.